Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the 9th Encounters 2020 talk, the 9th and final one. The title is Distribution Now, Creative Flexibility in Pandemic Times. This session is a conversation with the marketing, distribution and impact teams behind the documentary film For Sama, which I hope you've all seen at the festival, and if you haven't, catch it. I'm Leonie Maastorp, the moderator. I convene the Master of Documentary Arts degree program in the Center for Film and Media Studies at the University of Cape Town. Mickey Redlinghuis, a documentary filmmaker who just finished her MA specializing in impact producing with us at CFMS, is in charge of the Q&A, and she will share your questions with us. So please go ahead and share those questions when you are ready on the Q&A preferably, because we want to use the chat to share some links with you. Okay, I just want to share my screen again for a second. So use the Q&A for questions and see the comments for links and resources that you can use to find your way to all of the amazing things that we're talking about today. So thank you very much to Mandisa Zita and the Encounters team for giving UCT this opportunity again to contribute to the conversation about documentary and about reaching audiences during these very strange times. Thanks to the Encounters technical team working frantically behind the scenes to make us look good and think of ducks pedaling under the water. And to the UCT support team, Tabo Bupape, Takira Bihardin and Murati Muyambo. Now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the powerhouse team behind the distribution of the Oscar-nominated and BAFTA-winning documentary For Sama. Sarah Moses is the founder and CEO of Together Films. She is a leading impact distribution strategist who works with feature films to enhance social change. She has worked on numerous award-winning campaigns for titles including For Sama, Unrest, and The Hunting Ground. And her clients include filmmakers, film festivals, sales agents, distributors, and we'll share a link to a weekly webinar that she offers later on in the session, so look out for that. Rachel Chadwick is co-director of Action for Sama, the impact campaign running alongside the award-winning film For Sama. She works closely with filmmaker Wad Al-Khatib, and Rachel has extensive experience working in communication campaigns in international development space. Zach Brilliant is a distribution executive who has overseen the release of over 200 films in the UK market, from mainstream commercial hits to award-winning breakout art house titles. Zach worked on various aspects of the For Sama distribution, including the very successful BAFTA campaign. And Christelle Randall is a film publicity consultant with almost 20 years experience in the industry. Last year, she handled the UK publicity campaign for Sama, which won PR Campaign of the Year at the 2019 Screen International Awards. I'd like to structure the discussion around three broad themes. First, we're going to talk a little bit about conventional pre-COVID distribution strategy of the film, and then about how the team pivoted once the pandemic made public screening impossible. And finally, we're going to pull it together by talking about what lessons they learned from the online distribution that can help us imagine what the future looks like for blended distribution. I'd like to kick off part one, the old normal, by screening the trailer for the film. I know that the quality of video is usually not great on Zoom, so you're welcome to watch it here, but Mickey will also pop a link into the chat for you, so you can copy that and watch it later. Or if you like, you can play it now and just mute the Zoom for a moment. Okay, let me seamlessly, without referring to it, share my screen. And I sincerely hope the sound plays. Tech team, will you let me know if it doesn't?
There's no sound, Leonie. No audio.
عملت الفيلم عشانك. بدي اياك تفهم شو اللي كنا عم نقاتل مشانه. سما انا بعرف انك عم تفهم شو عم بصير. بقدر اشوف هالشي بعيونك. ما عم تبكي مثل اي طفل عادي. وهذا الشيء اللي عم يحرق لي قلبي. سما رح تسامحيني؟
I was just informed by the technical team that there was no sound on the first part of the trailers. So with your indulgence, I'm going to play it again.
بحلب مدينتي. لسه عم صور. هذا الشيء اللي عم بخلي معنا لوجودي. ما حدا منا كان عنده أي فكرة كيف رح تتغير حياتنا للأبد. حمزة أنا حامل. سما 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 عملت هالفيلم مشانك. بدي اياك تفهم شو اللي كنا عم نقاتل مشانه. بحبك كثير أكثر من هيك. بترقصوا في ضرب كثير اليوم. سما أنا بعرف إنك عم تفهمي شو عم بصير. بقدر أشوف هالشي بعيونك. ما عم تبكي مثل أي طفل عادي. وهذا الشيء اللي عم يحرق لي قلبي. سما رح تسامحيني؟
Okay, I hope that was better. In her Encounters Q&A earlier this week, Wad Al-Khatib explained that she was driven to make this harrowing film by a desire to make a positive change to the ongoing war in Syria. She sees the benefit of the commercial distribution, including the awards campaigns, as serving the purpose of getting more people to see the film so they can be moved to take action. So the commercial and the social change strategies are deeply entwined with and reliant on each other. Zach and Christelle, you worked together on the commercial distribution. Christelle, you first saw this film at Cannes in June 2019 and literally lobbied the filmmakers to let you have the campaign. This is a captivating film, but it is really hard to watch. How do you market a film like this to a general public?
I think this is this one for Christelle or for Zach?
For Christelle.
Okay. I mean, you know, we were lucky because obviously by the time we came on board after Cannes, the film had picked up some traction because there'd been a lot of buzz about it during Cannes. So certainly in the film circles, journalists were really talking about it. We already had some champions. So Kevin Mayer from The Times gave it 5 stars, and he was a big champion. So we kind of just picked up from that and set about having some small screenings, press screenings with cherry-picked journalists. So, you know, picking critics who would kind of keep that momentum going and just getting that word out. And, you know, it takes time. It's like, you know, obviously where we ended up with Full Summer is amazing, but we had so much, you know, it was a big job to be done early on, and getting people to screenings is often quite difficult. So I think we screened it quite regularly, didn't we, Zach? Between July, August, I remember we had like every 2 weeks we'd have another daytime screening, and we were just inviting editors, and bit by bit people came on board. So like the editor of Observer New Review was one of the first people who really came on board UK side, and that led us to then do our big feature. So, you know, every screening we did, we'd get somebody in there that was important, and then the ball really got rolling, I think. So by August, and by the time Observer ran as well, that ran like mid-August, I think. Then it was kind of like a hot ticket in terms of screening. People wanted to come and see it.
Zach, For Summer is the most nominated documentary in BAFTA history. Tell us about your distribution strategy, including the BAFTA award campaign.
Goodness, where do you start? I think maybe you start with the film itself. You know, for anyone that's seen it, I think it's very clear that this isn't just another documentary. The film is, you know, by any measure, exceptional. And I think that's at the core of everything, to be honest. I mean, just because it's exceptional doesn't mean to say it should have commercial success and be lauded with awards. That doesn't always happen. But I guess our roles as kind of collaborators and distributors and publicists is to kind of harness that and make people aware of it and connect it to find an audience. But it does start with the film. You know, what Wad and Ed achieved was unlike anything I think anyone had seen before. And, you know, it was our job to kind of guide that through, and that obviously had its challenges. And I think the biggest challenge is that perception that it is just another war documentary, another, you know, form of reportage. And, you know, there's been many films in the past, and many of them very good and important films, but it's kind of differentiating what For Summer was, and how it was more prescient and more urgent than anything they'd seen previously. And I think the critics helped in that regard. Christelle mentioned the strategy of showing it, and I think that was again the core of the campaign. And it wasn't just the critics filling up a screening room to see the film, it was then going to tell their network of contacts and friends and family about the film. And the film just had that momentum, if you like. You know, if 20 people saw it, you'd be fairly sure that they'd talk to people and then they'd want to see it. And we continued in that tact, and we did screen it for a long time. And it was just trying to generate that word of mouth and really stoke that critical reaction. You know, we had those early reviews, 5-star reviews from the Times newspaper and very prestigious outlets. And it was just riffing on that, you know, qualifying the film as a critical piece of cinema was very, very important.
Sarah, I come to you next. Together Films first got involved by providing festival support at the 51 Festival in July 2019, and then initiated the Impact campaign. Can you tell us a little bit about that, those early stages?
Yeah, so we ran the marketing for a festival in New York called the 51 Fest, which celebrated female directors. And that's where I first saw Osama in the July and witnessed a room full of people just crying and hugging each other, and kind of the emotional intensity was really overpowering. And it was a standout moment at the festival for me to kind of see the impact. And then we were really thrilled to have a recommendation from one of our friends, Mia at Bird's Eye View, recommending that the filmmakers speak to us about clarifying some of the areas around the impact campaign. Wad, alongside the co-director Ed, had a really clear vision of kind of what they wanted to achieve with the impact campaign, but with the film doing amazing work and so many screenings and Q&As, carving out the time to sort of formalise what that campaign could look like. They were looking for some support to kind of pull that together. The campaign is sort of informally launched at the Cannes Film Festival when the co-directors alongside Hamza, Wad's husband, had held up signs saying "Stop bombing hospitals," and that was the sort of key tagline of the campaign. Throughout this idea of a very kind of simple message on the outset of "Stop bombing hospitals," and then everything sort of coming around that. So we came on board kind of midway through the theatrical release in the UK, as they were leading up to the broadcast on Channel 4 in the UK and PBS in America, to put in some of the kind of foundational elements around the impact strategy. So one of those things was launching separate social media handles for the campaign, so that the campaign could be a little bit more pointed in terms of some of the human rights abuse conversations, really digging into the issue on a deeper level. Launching the Action for Sama website, which would house information about the campaign, kind of goals and missions, and also a donation feature towards one of the principal partners at Help Refugees, who run the Choose Love campaign. And also at that point, I then brought in two amazing humans, Rachel, who's on this panel today, and also Lisa, who were two colleagues who had extensive experience in human rights campaigning, not necessarily from a film perspective, but we always approach each strategy of thinking who has the expertise in a particular area, who would make sense for this campaign. So from my perspective, it was vital to bring in two human rights communication specialists to work on this side of it. So it was really thrilling to sort of watch the impact campaign blossom over those first few months around the theatrical campaign and the broadcast campaign, and great to see donations coming in to support organisations on the ground and really have some sort of impact wins in those early moments. And there was also a screening that was cultivated at the UK Parliament, which was initiated by Channel 4. And so having things like, what's that call to action? What are we asking of parliamentarians? If they're seeing the film, what can they actually do? And it was trying to bring some kind of focus and clarity in terms of what those asks could be. So I very much always say that this campaign is very much Wad's vision and sort of her intention. And we were just kind of coming in to help sort of put some just frameworks around it and kind of bolster up some team effort to it. And you could really see then how the commercial interest of the film growing was then growing the impact side. And as the impact side was growing, it was growing commercial side. So it's, I think, a really good balance of how commercial impact really thrived in this campaign. And some people try and distance an impact campaign too far away from the commerciality, whereas I think this campaign really highlighted that if you can embed them together in a quite close way, you can see some really great results as they come through.
Yeah, I think that's such a valuable takeaway, this idea that you can integrate the two parts that people very often see as separated, the commercial distribution and the impact. Nice segue to Rachel. Rachel, you and Lisa Hazelgard-Rao took over the impact campaign and established the Impact for Sama work. What did that entail pre-lockdown?
Yeah, so I mean, just to follow on, thank you for having me, but to follow on from what everyone else is saying, I think joining this campaign initially, it was just the power of this film and the ability of WAD to reach audiences around the world and speak from a human perspective to a human perspective. It was just undeniable, the power of this. And I think what we found at the beginning with the Impact campaign was actually there were so many different directions that this could go in, because there are so many audiences it can reach. So it's the medical community, it's mothers, it's families, it's people who need to find out more about the situation in Syria. We were finding so many people were engaging with the Impact campaign that this could have gone on so many different paths. So what we did at the beginning when we were working with WAD is she was really thinking about taking this Stop Bombing Hospitals message forwards. But in order to do that, because the impact campaign team was quite a small one, it was making sure that we had those amazing partners alongside us. So this was, we were never going to be able to be an NGO, or there's so many people already doing work in that area. So we really wanted to make sure that we had the best partners to help us and to advise us so that we could use this film as a tool to play into education pieces, into advocacy moments, and join up with them to do that. So I think initially, so the Syria campaign, Physician for Human Rights, and then Help Refugees, as Sarah mentioned, have been really, really close allies for us in terms of kind of helping us to really make sure that we've got that whole overview, and we're not also taking on too much of the amazing work that's going on for Syria anyway. And we are actually just focusing on how we can use Sama as a tool. I mean, the first question people ask is, what can I do afterwards? And so we've made sure that we've got several different areas. There's the donation function, there is then ways of engagement, and then more recently we'll go into the COVID times where we've created online initiatives for people to join in with. So we've just worked really closely with WAD to make sure that all that is possible. And I think a huge part of before the coronavirus pandemic hit was obviously the screenings and the in-person events. And WAD was booked to do several festivals and appearances. And I think when that time came, when everything went into lockdown, it was that moment that we had to look at those. And of course, it was such an uncertain time for everyone. We'd done a huge strategy on this amazing amount of community screenings and, you know, advocacy screenings, and then had to stop and, you know, and pivot. And I know we're going to talk about that in the coronavirus stage as well.
Well, that's a great segue to the second part, the new normal. But I just wanted to check in with Mickey whether there are any questions that have come up in the Q&A or through Facebook Live that pertain to part one.
I haven't received any questions yet,
Okay.
but maybe I can jump in here with a question, which I'm dying to ask, if I'm allowed to.
Please.
I think as filmmakers, we're off, you know, you put so much energy into making a film, and I think in this film in particular, the massive emotional energy that went into making this film, it must be really amazing to have such a strong team supporting the film once it's done. Obviously not all films are as evocative and are going to attract such an amazing team, and I'm not sure who am I directing this question to, so I'm going to just put it out there to the whole group. But you've done your film, kind of where do you start? Who do you get on board first? Is it the Zach? Is it the Christelle? Is it the Sarah? Is it the Rachel? Where do you go? Where do you knock?
That's a tough one. There seems to be a route that most filmmakers favour, and it's I wouldn't say it's tried and tested. It seems to be the pathway for you know, for documentaries, and that's applying for festivals, getting festival exposure for your film, and that's the hope. There is your film will get discovered in the first instance, and that could be discovered for distribution or just representation for international sales. It can be discovered in the sense that critics start writing about it and you get reviews and good things come from that. It's just showing your film to the world in that first instance, and that seems to be the route most documentary films take. But I do think that's changing somewhat. I mean, the festivals are still absolutely key and pivotal in that, but you know, in the digital age, you know, and particularly with what's happening with the pandemic, you know, with virtual festivals, you know, the idea of traveling somewhere and the selection process and the cost and everything involved, that's disappearing very quickly. But yeah, that's kind of the normal route, I'd say.
And then in terms of sort of like the impact piece, it really varies on campaign to campaign. So I think what for summer really shows here is there's a really amazing balance of like collaboration between all the different distributors as well. So just watching sort of Zach working and Channel 4 working in PBS, all sort of fighting for exactly sort of how Wild and Ed envisioned the film coming out, and you could see it sort of working. There's definitely examples and anecdotes that I won't bore into now of where distributors are not really embracing the impact side and not really fully grasping the opportunity, both from a commercial sense and also an impact objective sense, where some filmmakers feel slightly disheartened around some distribution efforts for their films. So I think what was really important is that you may not have like your impact team on board as yet, but asking those distribution partners like, what would you feel about me doing a screening in Parliament, and would you be happy if I wanted to work with Help Refugees, and how would that balance with you as a distributor, to make sure you're asking those key questions, so that you're not locked into a contract that actually disallows you from doing this amazing impact work. So we still had to be very cautious in terms of timelines. So there was a very strict timeline process of sort of, this is a theatrical window, here's the broadcast window, here's the BAFTA and Oscars window. You have to kind of really be very clear in terms of what everybody can do in that time. But I would say my recommendation to filmmakers is ensuring that if you are having those conversations with distributors, you might not know what the whole plan is yet, but just alluding to the fact, like, I would love to do screenings with NGOs, or I'm really pushing for a big petition about this thing. Are you on board with that? And are you happy with that? And would you be supportive of it? I'm not asking you to do the work, but are you going to allow me to do those items? So sometimes we come in much earlier to advise on the strategy, but also then who might be the right distributors as a right fit for a project, to make sure that they're like allowing you to do that impact work. So that's just my note of reference for everybody, is just to you want to find the right distribution partner, not just any distribution partner, if you want to do this kind of campaign. And I think it was, yeah, wonderful watching sort of all the traditional distributors kind of really supporting what Wild and Ed wanted to do.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, what has been really wonderful for us is Outlook Film Sales, who do the worldwide rights. They have been such a valuable partner for us on the impact campaign side. I mean, the amount of work they've done to secure this theatrical release in, I think it's 25 countries, and it's ongoing, and they're still booking festivals now. And they have just worked really closely with us to make sure the minute they are getting those inquiries in, they're immediately telling them everything to do with the impact campaign. So we're really aligned on that, and that's been wonderful. And I think something else to mention just about the experience of this one was very much, I think we've all heard Wad explain that she honestly had no idea that this film would take on like this. She obviously started filming for, to document the truth of what was happening, but never imagined it would become this. So I remember she always said she knew that she wanted this to be an impact campaign, but I think it just completely took a surprise when it took off. And that's why we then had to adapt and react quickly to get that moving alongside the way that the film was progressing.
Moment. Thanks, Rachel, Sarah, and Zach. I think just relating to that, there's a question that's coming on Facebook from Cholofelo. It says, the team has done a wonderful job with the marketing and distribution. Has the work into the campaign received any feedback on the direct improvement of the situation in Aleppo? That very hard question, which is possibly too soon to try and answer, but I'm going to hand it over to you anyway, Rachel.
Thank you. Yes, that is an excellent question. And I will be completely honest with you. It's been incredibly difficult. And also, we know that so many people have been working on Syria for so long, and policy change it's an incredibly lengthy and frustrating process. And of course, especially in times, the minute you have moved in a certain direction, particularly with governments, suddenly coronavirus hits and the agendas change. So it sets you back again, and then you have to rethink things. But I do think that what we have seen an incredible, obviously we've had massive results in the engagement rate of people. And also, so I think raising awareness, and I think also engaging people, on the ground in Syria. So we have partners, so we are hearing from them. And also I think at the moment, the immediate kind of way that we are supporting, I guess, and which is something that WAD never wanted to be, you know, the main objective, but has been, is we've raised £75,000, which has gone through our partners at Help Refugees, which has been going to those on the ground to help in these situations. So I'd say that is you know, a huge part of, so people come out of you know, of watching the film and want to help, immediately they can donate, and that money goes directly to the ground to help those. In terms of the actual impact on the, you know, the situation in Syria, for example, WAD has submitted her footage to the IIIM, which means that it can be used in a European court of law as evidence of war crimes. So this is the area where, you know, you've got the big accountability piece, but of course that can take 2 to 5 years. So I think, you know, in short, we haven't seen, you know, an immediate anything policy-wise. However, we are working at the moment, and something that I'll talk about when we're talking about kind of the new normal through coronavirus is our work with parliamentarians. We're moving it online now. So yes, there's been lots of wins in engagement and fundraising, but the advocacy is taking a lot longer.
Okay.
Well, that's really an amazing impact, is that fundraising piece. Mickey, awesome question. Thank you so much for both.
Okay.
Since lockdown started, distributors and impact producers around the world have had to reimagine access to audiences. On the commercial distribution side, challenges include compensating for loss of income due to cinema closure, navigating prestigious awards entries with no cinematic release. Luckily, many of the big awards have changed their requirements, and deciding which online platforms to stream the film on. On the impact side, of course, the biggest challenges have been how to arrange synchronous viewing experiences and have meaningful conversations with audiences to support social change. On all fronts, one thing is clear: the way audiences interact with films has shifted, and creative teams have to find new ways to reach them. Sarah, you've done a lot of work in this space, consulting filmmakers and festivals. What new ways of working have you managed to find and share?
Yeah, so when lockdown happened, we were mid-campaign on multiple projects and had sort of hundreds of screenings about to happen in the kind of foreseeable 3 or 4 weeks. Within about a week, they all had to be cancelled. So that's a loss of revenue for the filmmakers, which is always our priority, a loss of impact for those campaigns. And it was a very frightening time. I'm not gonna lie, March was pretty horrendous. So we were trying to come up with, like, how do we convert this energy? How do we convert these audiences into something that could happen online? And very quickly, we launched an experiment called Stay Home, Watch Together, which was a collaboration between different people working in the impact space, where we convened screenings of 20 films over 20 days. We set it up in 10 days and launched a website landing page to put it together. And it was a coordination of watching films online via whichever transactional VOD platform the films were already available on. So we were directing people towards whether it was Vimeo On Demand, Curzon On Demand, wherever their sort of location was, and then coordinating timed Q&As as part of that event. So Christelle hosted a conversation with the Fasama team. We had screenings with the Guides to Native Democracy. It was basically a collection of different impact titles, also screening within this same window. And it was a phenomenal sort of accidental sort of surprise. We had 20,000 audience members sort of engaged in the project over the 20 days. We had audiences tuning in from 49 different countries, and we were able to raise awareness of a kind of a variety of different sort of issues during that window. And it really opened up this ability of saying, okay, how do we then mobilize that on a long term basis? So the initial launch of our webinar, Digital Perspectives, was really to help people think, okay, from the very basics, like if you don't know what Vimeo On Demand is, this is what it is, this is how it works, how you can self-publish, you can affect your own pricing, you can give discount codes, just really giving the functionality of the technology that was available. But the essence of kind of, can you mobilize a community to want to watch at the same time and sort of engage? It's the same sort of theory of, like with what Rachel's doing day in day of liaising with partners, that same work has to take place, but you're now just driving them to an online location. So it took, I'd say, probably about a month for people to kind of understand that that's what we kind of move into. And then this area of work called virtual theatrical also then kind of was enabled, which was the same idea, but it was partnering with theatres on each of these screening links and then sharing the revenue with them. So this model was first adapted in the US with a distributor called Pinot Lorber. They had the first kind of one out there. We were supporting a project that was supposed to be in cinemas the final week of March in New York and flipped that to an online experience. So it was a very like testing of lots of different areas, but we're seeing sort of two ways that are working really well. So the virtual theatrical model is now definitely by no means generating the same level of revenue that you would have in cinemas previously, but it is generating some revenue partnering with theatres, and they will still book the film in the same way they would have done if it was in person, and they'll get a dedicated link, usually share 50-50 of the revenue that's come through the door, and then for marketing purposes, setting up different Q&A events to kind of drive that forward. And then on the community side, arranging sort of community online screenings. So one of our climate change films, 2040, we've hosted sort of 50 screenings with Extinction Rebellion as one kind of group of partners, and then different screenings around that. And then the thing that's really been growing massively over the last 2 months is then corporate engagement screenings, which has always been, depending on the film you're working on in an impact campaign, a really interesting element to discover. But if we take, for example, the issues of racial inequality in the US at the moment, voting rights issues, you're seeing a number of organizations wanting to host screenings with their employees and then have a Q&A. And that's a really, really great revenue driver for rights holders, and also, depending on what you're trying to affect change on, really significant for change. Because if you can get the CEO of a company to say, I'm going to publicly say in this Q&A, we're changing this, this, and this in our company, it can have a massive impact. So we just signed a title called Coded Bias that was at Sundance this year that looks all about bias within algorithms. And in the UK context, for those who may have seen, we had our school reports, for our A-level reports, come out recently. And it was basically like the worst mess up in terms of data algorithms across the country. So that film now is really interesting to be screened within educational context, but also within corporations to say, how are you designing these systems? So it took, a couple of months for everyone to like figure out the lay of the land, but now we're seeing a much more sort of appetite for saying, okay, this is great, I'll just do it online instead. And cultivate engagement. So you've still got to put the effort in to get them in the room, but they're happier now that it's a virtual room than they were in the first week of lockdown, for sure.
Those two of the things that you mentioned there are so interesting. This idea of the revenue share with the physical cinemas and also the corporate screenings. I think the corporate screenings specifically, that's something that South African filmmakers can really take on board and implement in their distribution. Rachel, what have you been doing in terms of the impact campaigns since the pandemic started? Nuts and bolts.
Okay, so we at first, as I think most people did, we panicked. We thought, how are we going to, adjust and adapt to the situation? Because we were having to postpone at first events, but then of course cancel them. And we had so many exciting trips, particularly around Europe for WAD planned for advocacy meetings and screenings. So of course we had to cancel all those, get together and really have a think about what was next. Of course, very conscious of the fact that this pandemic is global and the coronavirus effects in Syria were just, we were so concerned about this situation because, of course, there's so many media outlets who don't share the information correctly. There's misinformation. We have numbers coming out of there, but we don't know whether they're right. So of course, WAD and the team were all conscious of that. So I think, at the beginning, it was like, how are we going to use this? Of course, because the film is on the UK and in the US, we felt very fortunate with that and found ourselves before long. Fasama was being mentioned on all of the what to watch during lockdown, which was incredibly helpful because, of course, from that, people were coming to Action Fasama. We found that most of the kind of smaller screenings we had planned were moving online. So that was just when we were all introduced to these new technological platforms, which I'll be honest, we haven't really done much of ourselves, but have been involved in, participating in them. We've now mastered Zoom. But it was really just seeing that reach online then, and actually realizing we could reach further. So these smaller screenings that we had planned, we put them online. We were obviously getting larger audiences and more of an opportunity to then say, you know, here's what you can do to really help. And of course, with Help Refugees, we shifted the fundraising to then be an emergency response to the coronavirus situation in Syria as well. But I would say what we noticed is, I think one particular project that we were planning to do in person that we then launched online recently was something called Homemade City. And it gave families and children around the world an opportunity to join WAD and her children and Afra and their children in building a city while they were talking about their home, what it means to them. And then these paper buildings that people are all making are being turned into a virtual reality city. And I think that was unbelievable. I think we had about 10,000 views of that on our social media channels. And we just realized the reach of that and the world to be able to join. I think, like I said earlier, about the human to human element of the film, and that, you know, you've learned to know Wad and Hamza and Sama and Afra and Salam and the people in there. And so to actually create a project that allowed people around the world, thank you, to join them, they loved it as well. And also one of our partners on the ground, Mulham team, were able to join from one of their orphanages, and they took part as well. And just seeing the reaction, the data on how many people kind of watched it and took part, I think that was a really, really great thing for us to do during coronavirus, and really just utilize the reach of the online world for that. And also we saw a spike during coronavirus of views on our Take Action page, which was brilliant. So there were definitely more people kind of engaging on how they could help, which was brilliant.
Oh, fantastic. I have a little interloper here with me, Mona the cat. Zach, something that really intrigues me is the festivals are geo-blocked for specific regions. And yet we're so used to being able to access so much online. As a commercial distributor, how do you feel about that? Do you think that that situation will change? Will festivals open up more, or will they remain very limited to their regions?
I think it's evolving, and it's evolving very, very quickly. You know, when things started locking down around the world through March into April, those initial festivals were, you know, scrambling to see how they could continue in a virtual fashion. And I would imagine at that time there was probably quite a lot of pushback from sales agents, rights holders, distributors, you know, for pulling their content online. But slowly but surely that's kind of ebbed away. You know, all the major festivals through the summer and the autumn have all pivoted to be predominantly virtual festivals. I believe Venice are doing some actual screenings next month, but you know, a lot of the program's gone online. London Film Festival, Toronto. If they do have a physical footprint, it's vastly diminished, and it's being you know, beefed up in the virtual space. So you know, I think perception of that and issues that come with that have kind of gone away once everyone realized, well, that there isn't really another option here. So in terms of geo-locking, I don't actually know what's the current situation is. Maybe Christelle has some insights here for some of the fall festivals, but you know, I guess the festivals in terms of footfall would have always been, you know, local festivals. You know, Toronto, you know, would have been, you know, for that community there. So I can understand that, but I do see that changing. I think it has to change. You know, these festivals, by virtue of the pandemic, have just become, you know, a lot of them had international in their name, but now they are absolutely fully international, and that's no bad thing. Means, you know, people get access, but it'd be interesting to see where we are with the geo-locking and how that will evolve through the next year or so, because yeah, I feel like if these festivals want to sort of continue and exist and stay relevant, they've kind of got to get around that.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, I know that because I've been talking to Toronto, well, I've been looking at potentially doing a film in Toronto, and I mean, all of the campaigns that we do for festivals like Toronto can be done remotely now, and I feel like this might be an exceptional year. I mean, I don't know about geo-blocking before, but I'm sure this would be an exceptional year because they need to maximize their audiences, and Toronto especially has always been a very audience heavy festival, although yeah, of course they're local, you know, but the capacities of the cinemas are obviously going to be reduced, so they have to maximize the digital engagement too. And Venice, you know, Venice is, you know, all of the journalists that we know are going to Venice. There's a Facebook group which has been set up since lockdown, which is all the international journalists. So it's started sort of March, April with sheer panic, everyone thinking they'd lost their jobs, they weren't going to get any more festival work. But it's been quite interesting to see now as it's developed that festival by festival, I mean, all of that press group, you know, they want to go to every festival, and they're the main, you know, that's they're the people you need to support your film. So you know, it's filmmakers. I think it's just filmmakers and European talent traveling to Venice with the main actors, and they're still not traveling. So that kind of affects Toronto, I think, more so.
Great, Mickey. I'd like to invite you to share with us any questions that the audience has posted.
Right. So I don't have questions. Questions have been coming in relating to the previous section of the discussion. So I'm just going to share those right now. Mandisa Zita, who you all met earlier from Encounters Festival, she wanted to find out with regard to the impact campaign, who the partners were and what kind of resources they brought to the campaign. I think that could be for Rachel. Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, after all this time, I still managed to not unmute myself. Sorry. Yes. So we, Wad from her time, you know, promoting the film, but even before that, had a close relationship with Help Refugees, which is also known as Choose Love. So it's an organization based in the UK, but they do work globally as well. And they were the first, really, I think, to partner. So they are our fiscal sponsor, and they run the donation mechanism, which is hugely valuable. So they, I think, were the first. And then also WAD is closely linked with the Syria campaign. So the Syria campaign are, I'd say, our advocacy and political advisors. So they will help us with any kind of policy work that we're doing. They will help with getting meetings with politicians and Congress people. So that's the Syria campaign. Physicians for Human Rights, they do a lot of work around reports and particularly around kind of the attacks in Syria, so the data and things like that. So we have worked with them mainly on the UN action that we did earlier this year, which was when the UN were releasing a board of inquiry report about the attacks in Syria, and it just simply was not good enough. And WAD was incredibly angered by this, so much so that during award season, she traveled to New York to stand outside the UN headquarters, which was, yeah, a powerful moment. So Physicians for Human Rights were a big part of that, as were the Syria campaign and also Amnesty International. And then another partner of ours is the Mary Colvin Journalists Network, which WAD is now actually a mentor. So she mentors journalists through that as one of many other projects WAD has as well. So, and then of course, alongside that, it's the distribution partners. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. It seems that there's a lot of people in the room who are interested in making films with impact campaigns, because there's a lot of questions coming your way. Another one here is, if you want to make a film with a strong impact campaign and attached to it, Is it better to have a shorter or a feature documentary?
At the moment, there's sort of two different ways. It really depends on like the subject of the film. So my first thing was like, please don't try and make a feature if the subject you have is a short. That's like my first number one thing. So I think there's a lot of cases where some feature documentaries are made that could just be really great, like 15-minute short films around those issues, and they can have impacts in a really powerful way. There are definitely areas of work. We're working with the Open Society Foundation on a short film around the AIDS crisis, and with Oxfam around an issue in the West Bank at the moment. So there are definitely like short film possibilities where you can run impact campaigns alongside. So I would say start with your story. Like, should your story be a short or a feature? Just general sort of filmmaking 101. Like, please don't make it a feature if it's just a short. And then when thinking about your impact goals, there are some examples of short films. So The Nightcrawlers is a mid-length film as opposed to a feature film, and an incredible project by Violet Films. That project is doing amazing things around the world, and is not in the features category, but has done kind of a brilliant work. So there are definitely amazing case studies of short work that's done really well, but I would lead it from the story first. You would be less likely to get cinema distribution, so working with someone like Zach would be very difficult on a short, because cinemas playing short films is very difficult at the moment, but you might have a robust festival strategy and then maybe an online and community screenings potential.
If I can be so bold as to jump in there, I think in the South African context, we've found that medium length films and short films work really, really well, because especially if you are engaging with a particular community where people are taking time out of the busy day or evening to come and watch the film and engage in a conversation, you can't really expect people to take more than 90 minutes or maximum 2 hours. So if your film is 90 minutes long, it leaves very, very, very little time for conversation. Really, conversation is so pivotal to reaching audiences and affecting change.
Yeah. I've got one more question, Leonie, but I think I'm going to hold on to that question later. It's a question for the filmmaker, so we can move on to the next section.
Ah, that's a good reminder. Stick around if you're here. Don't leave before the end of the session, because there's a surprise coming, a very, very nice surprise. But now I think it's time to move on to part 3 of the discussion, and that's talking about the next normal. So it's become clear that at least for some time to come, audiences and probably filmmakers as well will want to continue with online screenings and engagement in addition to any in-person screenings once they become possible. So I foresee that we'll have some kind of a blended future. What do you guys think? Christelle and Zach, can I bounce it to your side first?
So yeah, sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Well, maybe I should pose a very specific question. Have you seen any benefits for commercial distribution that have come out of the last few months that you can take forward to after lockdown, after COVID, when we're back to going to the theaters and sitting next to each other and talking to each other? Is there anything that can be incorporated into a commercial distribution campaign that we learned during COVID?
Well, from a publicity perspective, I'm currently working on a film called Rocks, which will come out in UK cinemas mid-September. And that was due to be released before lockdown, 3 weeks before lockdown, and it got pulled. So the campaign was pretty much in place. So we've been on board since the end of July, and it's almost been like a brand new campaign. And actually what we've been able to do is we've organised about 6 or 7 separate press days. And normally, these are all done on Zoom. So normally you would have, you'd have to try and get the actors to be available, and these girls are small as well. And so you're limited, and also it costs money because you have to hire hotel rooms, you have to, talent costs, all of that. So actually we've been able to do like a Zoom junket once a week. And these are packed junkets, so they're full of journalists. They don't cost anything to the distributor because they're all digital. The only thing we've had to do is give the girls, one of the girls didn't have any laptops at home, so we had to get her a laptop. But it just means that the reach is huge, and actually that will be of benefit. I mean, I'm going to be working with Zach on his next feature, and with a director who's not based in the UK, it just means that the potential is much bigger. You can organize back-to-back interviews that of no cost, and also Q&A events, so all the people like Together Films, all the cinemas like Curzon, BFI at Home, all of those guys who are doing regular Q&A events online. So again, with ROX, we have got 2 weeks back-to-back Q&A program, and we're covering all of it, and normally we wouldn't be able to do that. So I think that's a huge benefit, particularly for independent films.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning and a lot of this brave new world has sort of broken down barriers about what we could do, and in creative ways of getting around problems, and that's certainly some positives happening in the distribution space, particularly these virtual Q&As you can do. I think it's worth pointing out that commercially, fiscally, it's hard, because the loss in cinema revenue is difficult for some of these smaller films, that rely on the box office to ultimately dictate what downstream revenue looks like. So that's hard. It's not like you're losing box office, but you're gaining greater digital revenue. It doesn't quite work like that. So it has been a very challenging time. And, from the perspective of a very small independent distributor, which Republic is, which I represent, we're looking ahead to when theatres do open, to when we can platform our films successfully and create as much noise as possible and get a bit closer to what we were doing previously. And I think there are signs that's happening. I mean, it's territory by territory, and it's different all around the world, but certainly in the UK, cinemas capacity is creeping up week by week. I think a lot of the hard work's been done by the studios, because the cinemas need those big tent poles to help with kind of consumer confidence. And the hope is that some of those smaller art house, more independent cinemas kind of last the distance, because a lot of those are very exposed after 4 or 5 months closure. And there's a lot of work going on by the BFI and DCMS, part of the government, to kind of support those smaller venues and try and ensure they stay alive. And then we'll just have to see how 2021 sort of moves forward.
Yeah, I think the impact on cinemas is incredible at this point. In South Africa, the 2 very well-known independent cinemas, one in Cape Town and one in Johannesburg, the Labia Theatre in Cape Town and Bioscope in Joburg. And the one decided to go completely online, and the other one is doing reduced capacity in-person screenings. So I found that quite interesting that they have picked these 2 very divergent strategies. Rachel, how do you see impact work being influenced? Which ways of engaging with audiences can you take forward into campaigns once we go back to face-to-face, IRL?
Yeah, I think we are all looking forward to some IRL time. I think there's nothing like being in a room with people, particularly with a film like Fasama, to experience that with other people and then to talk about it afterwards. But that said, I think we're looking now at kind of, I guess, take it month by month and a hybrid plan of really kind of learning from what we've seen from the online activity and how much we've grown on our social channels and the website views, and also keep working with Outlook as it's being shown in festivals and around the world, and just how we can really kind of grow our audiences online as well. That said, there's still lots of opportunities that's starting to creep through for travel for WAD as well, for where it's possible. But it does seem that WAD she's constantly in demand, because she is an incredible filmmaker and activist across the board. So I think we've actually seen we thought that maybe things might quieten down, but it's actually just ramped up. And so particularly next month, we've got, a parliamentary moment, we've got a couple of big press moments. So it's really, at the moment, I guess just adapting each month as well. And of course, Wad has been and still does work for Channel 4 News as well. So she was covering some of the coronavirus footage. So she's also got 5 projects. So it's just juggling it all and adapting, I guess, each month as it goes forward now.
5 projects and parenting. Sarah, you've been doing a lot of consulting work. Do you mind telling us a little bit about the Digital Resources Guide and how that can be useful to filmmakers, festivals, distributors navigating the way forward?
Yeah, so it was like the second week of lockdown, we put together a guide in partnership with our friends at Picture Motion, which was the first episode of the webinar we did, which is really running through all the different technology systems and the different ways you could work with them. So whether you wanted to charge tickets, whether you wanted to have just free RSVPs, whether you wanted to have a Q&A live or not live, pre-recorded. So we kind of started the guide as a way for people to navigate what the different options would be. And that has sort of now evolved into our work with our different kind of client sets. So we work with the Human Rights Watch Film Festival, which is a partner we've been supporting for the last 3 years on their marketing and distribution efforts. So we pivoted their festival in March. It was cancelled after the opening night, which was heartbreaking because of lockdown. So the New York edition that happens in June, we pivoted to an online edition, and we actually secured 98% year-on-year ticket numbers, which was like an astounding surprise to all of us. So it was like, could we get anyone else to kind of watch online in the same regard? But we secured 98% of the ticket numbers we had the previous year. So we were really thrilled with that. And then we've been helping a number of other festivals and distributors sort of navigate how to go online. So I would encourage everybody to rewatch that webinar. It was looking back now, it will seem very simplistic to kind of the knowledge we have today, but if you're starting on the first step of trying to work out how to do this, that's a really good introductory webinar to have a look at. And then we will be publishing more in-depth blogs and case studies or projects that have sort of taken some of that inspiration. So we hosted an event last week on Coup 53, which was a documentary by Taghi Amirani around the situation in Iran. And we had a live Q&A with Ray Fiennes and Jon Snow from Channel 4 talking about the film. And Taghi was directly inspired by what he'd watched in the webinar and ended up launching a 4-territory digital release across the UK, US, Canada, and Australia, and grossed a significant amount of money through this virtual theatrical model. And we were very humbled that he said he was directly inspired by some of the stuff he was learning from the webinar to do that from a film that he didn't think originally was going to be able to secure sort of theatrical launch. So maybe if you're going to start on the webinar, start in week 1 if you're completely new to any of this, and then sort of build up your knowledge throughout. And we also featured the team from AMPAS before they'd announced that the Oscars going to change their rules. Initially, we were like, surely you do need to change your rules. So we were sort of quite quick in there with the different awards bodies to say, how are you going to change your guidelines? Because we cannot qualify in New York and LA in the way that we would do before. What would be the changes around that? So Tom is on, I think, week 5 talking about that as we go through. And Kino Lorber also detailed their box office grosses from their first of 6 weeks of release, which are really interesting. So the webinar series in itself is a completely free resource. Anybody can tune in from around the world. We probably have, I think now, like 50 to 60 different countries who've been represented in the audience. And we go live now every other Monday with Insight. And for this impact group, we're actually working with the Centre for Media and Social Impact based out in the US on a specific addition to our webinar series launching in September that will be focused more implicitly on kind of impact campaign work and looking at digital marketing strategies, press strategies, engagement strategies with leaders. And I can't say who they are at the moment, but we're announcing the lineup next week, but really significant leaders in working racial justice and social movements. So whether or not you are making kind of really intense kind of impact films or just want to get an update on digital marketing skills, we're getting basically the geekiest people who know how to do everything of those kind of retargeting, mobilization, kind of consumer marketing efforts to come and talk about that to enhance impact work. So follow along on our mailing list, and we'll be announcing that next week.
I'm one of those people from far-flung places that joined one of your webinars. I saw the one where you featured the Human Rights Watch Festival, and I must say that your webinar is incredibly slick and very informative. So I really want to encourage everyone to go and have a look at those replays, and thanks for putting the replays up online. But that specific webinar was the one that made me hungry to go to watch festivals overseas. And unfortunately, The Human Rights Watch Festival is one of those that's geo-blocked for specific areas. So I guess we all need to look out for festivals in our specific regions.
That though is that Human Rights Watch will be doing some regional virtual activity later in the year, which will just be announced. So you may have the opportunity to watch some of those photos at a future date.
Yeah, they have an edition in Kenya, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so I hope that will be open for the whole of Africa. Then I'll put up another auto reply on my email saying, sorry, I'm at a virtual festival. Don't bother me now.
Yeah.
I want to bounce it over to Mickey for questions, unless there's something else that one of the panelists has, something that's burning that they want to share. Okay, Mickey, do you have any questions from our audience?
I haven't had anything new come in, but I have a question. I'm just wondering, I'm getting a signal warning. Am I clear? Can you hear me?
We can, for the moment.
Okay. Okay, wonderful. I mean, I think just to comment on sort of the lessons learned from where we are right now, one of the advantages is that we can all be here together in the virtual room. Under normal circumstances, we might not have had this opportunity to have you all attending encounters, even though everybody seems to know about us in the UK. We're relatively far flung, and it's not always accessible. So this new virtual world we find ourselves in does create a sort of paradoxical closeness through all our social distancing. I wanted to, I think it was Sarah, you spoke about the screening and the online Q&A with a project with the film, and Ray Fiennes was in the Q&A, if I heard correctly. I'm just wondering, with all this virtual activity, I mean, how is the uptake on that? Are people tuning into that as an option, or are people sort of settling into Netflix and disengaging in your experience?
So yeah, it really varies, literally day by day. So some projects where you think like, of course there are going to be 300 people tuning into this, and then you get like 2 people, and you can't even articulate like the why, or like this should be the biggest attended event of the week, and for whatever reason it's not. And then the flip side, you suddenly get like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people coming in. So even when we launched our own webinar, I thought literally like 20 people tune in, and over 1,000 people came for the first one, and that was a kind of huge surprise. With the Ray Fiennes and Jon Snow event last week, we had over 1,000 people tuning in live at the time, and when we look at comparisons against other things that maybe Cousin are doing, or other kind of cinema events, I'd say the average for most of the Q&As online that we're tracking is maybe 100 to 150 people. So having 1,000 people at this event last week was phenomenal, and that was all down to Taggy's team. We weren't managing the marketing of that, we were just supporting the technology side. And what they plan for is having everyone in 4 countries across the US, Canada, UK and Australia will watch the film over a 24-hour period, and then join for a simultaneous Q&A. So I think there's definitely a value in directing towards a single point of focus in terms of your marketing that can be really helpful. And then the other way we've done it is looking at a week-long set of programming. So with 2040, we had 5 different Q&A events to mark the US virtual theatrical launch, and each night was themed with a different side of the issue and had different speakers speaking to that. And then we were getting sort of the multiple hundreds of people viewing in directly in kind of a Zoom kind of environment like this. We use a different platform called Crowdcast, and then that content is then recirculated online into kind of have the views in the thousands. So I think the good thing, and I think I would definitely recommend to everybody, is that your live aspect may be between 100 people to 1,000 people, but make sure you have that content available then on replay on social media channels, or stream directly through to socials at the time, so increase that visibility. So most of those ones for 2040, we're then seeing like 5,000, 10,000 views of the content as it goes out on social over the kind of the following 48 hours. But the actual live experience of like who is actually available to log in at 7 p.m, I think if you're getting anywhere between 100 and 1,000 people, you're doing really well in terms of the current market.
Yeah. Well, I will certainly be joining the webinars. It sounds like an amazing opportunity for filmmakers to stay engaged. Another question I have, something that came out of one of the earlier panels in the week on encounters, was that there was going to be possibly a shortage of films in the next year. Is that something that's flagging on your radars as distributors and publicists?
I think that's interesting, because obviously there's been a break in production, an extensive break, and it continues because obviously things aren't quite up and running around the world. I think it's slightly countered by the fact there's so much content that at the time the pandemic came in, there was quite a lot of content that was still effectively on the shelf and rolling out and post and beyond. But yeah, logically there will be a gap out there, but I think things just spread out to fill it. And also, particularly in the documentary space, certainly, well, depending on the material, but production can continue during lockdown. Obviously, filming is challenging, but when you're working with contributors, and you can still work with small crews and archive and so forth. So I'm attached to various projects that kind of carried on full steam ahead over the last few months, and actually found it quite an efficient way to work during that time, because it gave them the focus and there were less distractions. So maybe arguably the documentary space should be less impacted by this break, but in the kind of narrative kind of fiction space, then yeah, that will prove to be maybe a slight problem, maybe a problem for Netflix, but no one else.
Yeah, I see there's a question come in here. Could we ask from Julia Kane, who's a lecturer at UCT as well? Could we ask for advice to new and emerging filmmakers interested in working in the field of impact producers?
So Doc Society, the film fund where I used to work, has a really helpful impact producers guide that you can download online. It's a PDF and interactive website with some tips and tricks, and it's been translated into multiple languages to help those kind of looking to enter the space. From my position of sort of where we're looking at this new webinar series with the Centre for Media and Social Impact, we'll be launching the first episode. I think it's going to be the 21st of September, and that will be a free resource again, 8 weeks of experts from leading issue organisations that were getting really geeky in terms of metrics, analytics, data, how to sort of mobilise audiences. I'd say if you're looking to enter the space of impact production, your awareness of digital marketing skills is vital. So one of the reasons that we brought on Rach onto this project for Action for Summer is that she was a social media kind of content creator. Like, she understands the metrics, she understands how to create good content, is a very good copywriter. So if you're looking to enter the space, I think the key aspect is that you need to kind of increase skills in your knowledge of distribution. You have to understand how does the impact work alongside the traditional distributors. You have to understand what is appropriate in terms of whether you can sell licenses or not. But I'd say if you want to succeed in terms of running a robust impact campaign these days, is that you need to have people who are really amazing communications specialists, and that's why Rachel and Lisa were brought into this campaign, because those are the skills that they had and they could contribute. So if you're going to do any kind of self-learning or self-training, I would geek out on analytics. How do you monitor social listening online? How do you track themes and breaking stories? You can do a lot of self-learning online in terms of understanding Google Analytics, understanding Facebook Business Manager, kind of go through those back-end processes to upskill is a really powerful way to do it. But yeah, for me, the reason to bring on Rachel and Lisa is they were really great communicators, and that's what an impact campaign thrives on, is being able to communicate with your audience. So yeah, go with that.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions that's coming from my side. So I'm going to hand back to Leonie.
Fantastic. And I am beyond happy to say that I see Ward Al-Khatib, the co-director of the film, has just joined us. And I'd like to pass a first question your way. I think a question that most people in the room have is, what can we do? So can you share with us what we can do at this point to help the situation in Syria?
Hello, Leonie. Thank you so much first for having me, and I'm very honored and glad to join this panel with my amazing colleagues and team. And yeah, I mean, what can people do? People can do a lot, and it might seems like it's very small steps and small things, but at the same time, all of this amazing joining effort could make a change on the ground. I mean, we are trying to raise awareness as much as we can about Syria and try to put pressure on the governments, like in the Western countries, in our countries, and everywhere. So, I mean, first, I'm asking people to join us in Action for Sama and follow the campaign. Like there's so many parts of like where you can like communicate and play your role as it is. You don't need to do anything like new or something. And I really hope like that will make people more involved. There's also part which we're trying to involve even like children in the Syrian situation through a project we just launched like recently, and it was like the leading by Rachel, who's also here with us now. It's called Homemade City. And we really were shocked about how many people were enjoying this project and how many children they wanted to join us in the next couple of events. And I mean, that's it. Like we are moving toward a very big steps in accountability. So we hope really also like to keep going and putting on more pressure to seek for justice.
So in this session, we've talked a bit about the awareness raising, and I think that that's something that the film does incredibly well. And Rachel also mentioned the funds that have been raised that can be used to make an actual tangible difference on the ground. You also in the process of making it possible to share some of the footage to persecute these human rights crimes. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because, you know, from the point of view of impact production, raising awareness is fantastic, and many films can do that. But to make a change at policy level, to make structural change is usually the most difficult.
I mean, I was lucky enough to have an amazing people around me. Even like usually the PR or the publicist of the film, they were always like, no, don't talk about this, don't do that. While with Crystal and Zach, it was brilliant, like support in every step we want to do. I mean, like for me, the film is not just a film, it's my life, and it's like something still happening until today. So we were thinking from the beginning to go beyond like the film as just a film and do screenings. And for this, like we were trying to like just look for any opportunity to meet politicians or decision makers, try to like gather people to sign a petition or like to send to their MP about the film. So like part of that was like how we can use this footage to make a real difference. And of course the film is like a great platform, but also we want to like seek more for accountability for justice. And for this we had like the communication with the IIIM, which a mechanism to collect evidence about war crimes. And we also working with Guernica 37 about law case against the regime and Russia related to attacking hospitals. I mean, it's not that easy process, and we've been talking about that now for almost like a year. Also, Rachel like knows like maybe more about the steps toward that, because like I think Rachel, you can mention something about how frustrating is it as a process, because we've just like very upside down in every level of this. We feel sometimes, you know, like we moved very like long in this, but then we're still at the beginning of this. Rachel, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I spoke about that a bit earlier, where it was just about how, yeah, currently, yeah, no, thank you. No, the ways that we're seeing at the moment, especially through having to adjust our strategy for coronavirus, was that we've been able to engage kind of more our supporters. And I guess your supporters, I think, rather than followers, they're like ambassadors. So, I mean, people sharing messages about the projects and all that, you know, all the exciting things that people can get involved in engagement wise. However, we were saying that on the policy level and anything to do with law, you know, legal cases, and particularly with, you know, anything like coronavirus happening, you get 5 steps forward and you have to take a few back, and then, you know, you come up against challenges along the way, and it's definitely a long-term it's a long-term plan. However, it's, you know, amazing to see these short-term projects that are still keeping the momentum going, people engaged. So it means that WAD has got that support as this case builds, you know, on the other side. So
what so much of the campaign centers around you, and people crave your presence, as we craved it in this panel, and thanks for satisfying that craving. You, on a personal note, you know, you have a family, you have 2 kids, you're a journalist. How do you sustain your energy? How do you keep going?
I mean, it's really hard, and especially at this time, specifically like a lockdown for a couple of months, and even like feeling so much about what's happening in the world, where like everyone attention like got to totally different area. But at the same time, like, you know, it's very important when we see that, like, even now in South Africa, people want to know about this, people want to do something in this. And I think that's where I got like so much of my strength now, from people reaction, from people like willing to do something. And I mean, like, I have no other option, you know, I mean, life should continue, and I should find my way to keep going in the way, like, this film is like providing to me very important platform to still talk about Syria and about what's happening. So I would say, like, for now, it's really from what the film is doing all over the world.
What I think I speak for all of the attendees to just say that we have so much respect for the work that you've done and that you're still doing. And we're all sending you lots of love and energy to sustain you. Mickey, can you please share some audience questions with us? I'm sure the audience is dying to ask Wad some questions.
Yes. So hi, Wahad.
Hi.
Bukhari Damasi, who's a filmmaker, I think I recently saw he was, hello, he's making a film in the Eastern Cape at the moment, and he would really like to know how long it took you to make this film.
Yeah, I mean, I kept filming for 5 years when I was in Syria, and through this 5 years, I mean, there was no plan to make a film, so I was just like gathering material. And I did like some small projects, but it wasn't like that big as documentary. So, I mean, this 5 years, you can consider it from making the film, but it wasn't like really a plan of like, yeah, I'm doing now a film. And then it took us like 2 years while we were just editing the film, writing the script, and try to like build the structure of the film. And yeah, I mean, like in total was 7 years. And so far, like the impact of the film and the release, like, I mean, I really miss Zach and Crystal. Now it's been like since the Oscar campaign, we didn't like worked a lot together now, but I mean, it was an amazing 1 year and a half, and it just like, I can like really consider even this 1 year and a half, it's from the time of the film itself.
So basically, Bukhari, you got to hang in there. It's going to consume your life.
Mickey,
I have another question for you, from Sihle Kunene. Yes?
No, I just want to say we have time for one more question for Wad.
Okay. So Sihle Kunene has got a burning question. Wanting to know, in many ways, part of the work you're doing is about whistleblowing. How can audience members and other people involved support keeping the creators safe and continue doing their work?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Sorry. Can you please repeat it?
Sure. So it's got to do with whistleblowing, and how can audience members support people who are sharing truth and ensure that people stay safe and manage to still get the word out? What can we do, in other words? Ask Sihle.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. I mean, I think like the most important thing about this is like as much as we can to talk about these issues and tell people to watch these films, and like to give any support like we can do for anyone who has like a very sensitive and hard story. But also at the same time, like sometimes I know so many people who are filmmakers, they have lack of fund in their films, they have lack of even maybe just like an opinion on people who are really care about this issue. So I think like any one of us who has any skills could like be helpful for other people to help, and like to for them, you know, like to feel that they are ready like to share their story at the end. And about the security, I mean, it's not that easy, and I think like there is no one answer about this. But for example, in my situation, I just took that decision, and I know that at any point it could be something like bad happened, but the importance of telling the story was for me like more important than my own safety. And I think like as people, we like, as much as we want like to tell this story out, but at the same time we care about our safety and our like security. So I think every like person could like deal with this as much as they can, but it's, of course, it's not that easy.
Wad, we're very aware of your limited time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I'm very happy to see Sarah. It's been a very long time. Thank you. And also Crystal and Zach. Like, I mean, we've had very amazing time together. So thank you for everything you've done. And Rachel, I will see you every day, and I'll see you later. So see you later. And thank you so much for everyone who watched the film and for this amazing, like, you bring now the film again to another like point of attention. So thank you for that.
It is our pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
love having you in the room with us.
See you all. Bye bye.
Thank you.
So before we wrap up, it's 2 minutes left for our session to keep it to a neat 90 minutes. Does any panelist have a burning issue that they want to raise, or anything else that they want to share with us?
I guess if there's anything, I'd just be like to be inspired by Wad. I think all of us will say that like this really worked because she's an amazing human, and if you have the privilege of working with someone like that, like really treasure it, like support them how much they can, and really recognize when I think the combination of the film and her is what made this campaign so powerful. So if you have the ability and chance to work on these projects, it's really amazing and thrilling. And it's like the ability of being able to support someone have their vision come out to the world is a real privilege. And I think we all take it as a real privilege we get to work on these campaigns. So yeah, good luck to anyone who's trying to do it. And I hope this is a really good inspiration for what can be achieved when you work as a good team. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, and I put Wad on the spot there by joining, but she was keen to say hello, and I think it's just the amount of things that are coming up for the campaign, some of which are coming up in the next month. It would be incredible for people to come and join the journey. Wad is the voice of it. It's all her. So to follow the journey, please come over to Action for Sama and see what we're up to. And of course, if you'd like to help, we've got our Take Action page, which has been shared. So thank you.
Zach, any closing remarks from your side?
Just thank you for having me join. It's been great. It's been great to sort of link up with South Africa like this, and going back to what we were talking before about the way things have changed to the positive. I think the fact that we can do these things and people from all around the world can engage at the same time, I think that's a really great thing.
I concur. Crystal? Oh.
Sorry. Thank you so much for having me too. And it's been wonderful to hear the discussion and some of the questions, and also to see Wad again, and just actually I was really interested to hear the update on what's happened on the impact side from Rachel and Wad, because that was a big part of the passion that drove us to do what we did. So it's interesting to hear, and slightly depressing, but we know how these things go, but yeah, just thank you, and it's wonderful to the South African element for me is wonderful because I spent quite a lot of time there 10 years ago, so that was really nice too. So.
Well, on that positive and fun note, it's time to conclude our session. Thank you so much to all of our guests for joining us for this final Encounters talk hosted by UCT Centre for Film and Media Studies at Encounters Virtual 2020. I, for one, believe that we ended with a bang. Please remember to check out the Action for Sama campaign. Mickey shared the link with you in the chat. And I also suggest that you quickly download the chat so that you have all of those links and resources that she shared going forward. I apologize to everyone who posted a question that we couldn't get to. Rachel has said that it would be possible to engage after this panel on the social media. Rachel, what is the best channel for people to reach you if they have burning questions?
If they have burning questions, then yes, I mean, please feel free to send them across either openly or in our inbox. We're at Action for Sama across Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And also we are hello@actionforsama.com if you have a lengthier question. I'll pop it in the group chat.
Great, and I sincerely hope that our attendees will not shower you with questions that are not related to exactly what they can do to support For Sama. Such a huge thank you to Sarah, Rachel, Christelle, Zach, and of course to Wad for joining us and sharing your experiences so very, very generously. There's so much that we can take into our own practice, and then we can take forward from what you've done on For Sama. Such an inspiring campaign, such a huge piece of work that you've all done. Thank you so much for that. And thanks again to the UCT and Encounters support teams. You guys rock. We'll be hosting, by the way, to everyone, we'll be hosting 3 more UCT Impact sessions at the Durban Film Mart next month. So please go to their page and check those out. You can either join us for one of the sessions, for 2, or for the full 3, which will be very enriching, I'm sure. And we'll have impact producers and other people playing a role in impact from around the globe, and we'll dig more into some of the issues that came up earlier around reaching rural audiences, how we do things in Africa, in the global south, and speaking to audiences that are not necessarily as connected as the audiences that for this For Sama campaign has reached so efficiently. So we look forward to seeing you there. I'm sure I speak for everyone here when I say that we feel inspired to find new hybrid ways of getting our films to bigger audiences globally, while also serving our local audiences and communities. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. Have a wonderful weekend at Encounters. I hope we'll see you there at screenings.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.